Jason Voorhees has seen many ups and downs. He's been killed, resurrected, and killed again, only to resurrect one more time. This undead monstrosity found a biomechanical upgrade when a bunch of scientists from the future thawed him out of his 400-year slumber. Jason Voorhees became Jason X and began his killing spree aboard a spaceship before coming back to Earth, only to be launched back into space. Interestingly, in one of the story arcs, Uber Jason, or Jason X, meets his original counterpart, but there can only be one Jason that will survive. In this video, we will explore Jason X's origin and explore two exhilarating comics filled with obnoxious violence and gratuitous graphic scenes. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Frightening origin of Jason X. In the year 2008, Jason was finally captured by the authorities and was found guilty of committing more than 200 murders. The government chose to send him to the Camp Crystal Lake Research Facility, the place where Jason began his murderous journey. Camp Crystal Lake was gone, but they built a scientific research facility in whatever remained of the place. The captors of Jason Voorhees tried multiple techniques to execute the vicious serial killer, but failed each time. From electrocution and firing to gassing and hanging, nothing was able to kill good old Jason. Ultimately, they decided to simply put him under heavy sedatives until something could be figured out about his execution. 2 years later, the researchers, led by Rowan LaFontaine, decided that it would be best to put Jason into cryogenic sleep. However, the decision was overturned because another scientist named Dr. Wimmer convinced his superiors that Jason's body could regenerate at an accelerated speed. He wanted to replicate Jason's apparent cellular regeneration. Dr. Wimmer, played by none other than special effects maestro David Cronenberg, organized Jason's journey to a Stanford facility to be studied and experimented upon, but he was not put on ice. However, when Wimmer and his men came to take Jason, they were horrified to learn that Jason had escaped by murdering the guard and replacing the guard's body with his own to deceive the men and buy time. Jason immediately slaughtered Wimmer and the others before chasing after Rowan, who managed to lure her pursuer into a basement that housed a cryogenic chamber. She used a shotgun to knock poor Jason out and into the ice chamber. He began to freeze, but suddenly gained consciousness and compromised his pod, which led the gases to freeze Rowan instead. However, this led to an automatic and total lockdown of the facility, and Jason was locked in. Even the government thought it was best to leave the facility alone with Jason inside. 4.5 centuries passed, and Earth turned into a dystopian planet bereft of natural resources and filled with pollution. Humans moved out to another planet that they conveniently called Earth 2, and clearly everyone had forgotten about Jason Voorhees. But in the year 2455, Professor Brandon Lowe leads a team of students and his android companion KM-14 on a field trip to Earth. These people end up at Camp Crystal Lake, where they find Jason's supposed corpse. The team takes Jason to Lab 1 on their spaceship, the Grendel, so that he could be studied. However, the frozen Jason thaws and goes about his business, like killing people with surgical tools, stalking them so that they soil their pants, etc, etc. However, the chaos led the spaceship to crash into a nearby space station called the Solaris, which destroyed the station and caused immense damage to the ship itself. Jason was unleashing his wrath on the survivors, but then he met his match in KM-14, who was trained in, or rather updated with, combat abilities. She rained thousands of bullets on Jason, destroying his limbs and head. But this was just the first act of a Friday the 13th film, and it's foolish to assume that Jason had perished, even after having his entire body pierced with so many bullets. Jason's body was reconstructed by the nano ants in the medical bay. These miniature robots used scrap and metal to replace the flesh in his body, and turned Jason into a cyborg called Uber Jason. Now, Mr. Voorhees had already shown signs of superhuman strength and regenerative abilities, but now that he was part metal, he was in the most powerful form ever. Jason resumed his stalk and kill drill, but the survivors had managed to call in help from the rescue vessel called the Tiamat, and since Grendel had suffered serious damage, they were trying their best to keep the ship from exploding. This time round, even KM proved futile against Uber Jason's brute strength, who punched her head off as if it was nothing. The killing spree continued, and the survivor head count kept going lower and lower. But Tiamat was close, and the survivors came up with a plan to halt Jason's carnage. They produced Camp Crystal Lake's holographic version to distract him. While the others managed to get into the Tiamat, Sergeant Brodsky tackled Uber Jason to the best of his abilities. Meanwhile, the Grendel finally exploded, and the impact threw both Uber Jason and Sergeant Brodsky into space. In the end, Uber Jason plummeted through Earth 2's atmosphere. The friction caused by their unshielded entry incinerated both of them. Although Sergeant Brodsky died in all probability, Jason's metallic mask was discovered by a couple of teens. The film does not elaborate on Jason's death, but the story continues in the comics. Having said that, it's now time to explore Jason X Special. Evil cannot be contained. Thanks to Avatar Press, Uber Jason's story continued in this one-shot comic written by Brian Pulido. The comic serves as a direct sequel to the film and takes place immediately after the events of the movie. So after Jason crashes near a pond on Earth, a couple of horny teens find him. The couple approaches Jason, and the guy figures that it could be a singularly unique scientific discovery. The girl agrees, but for some reason gets turned on. In her own words, science made her horny. The couple make love near a tree when another tree comes flying towards them, crushing them to paste. Of course, this was the work of Uber Jason, who had sustained little to no injury from his great fall. But Jason's activities were being closely watched by someone who worked for a scientist named Kristen. However, Jason learned about this probably because of his newfound cyborg body. He picked up the dead lover's severed head and hurled it at this observer's room. Truly gruesome stuff. Jason kills this dude, but it turns out that he was also a robot like KM from the movie. However, the self-destruct had been commenced, and the impact flung Jason so that he would land on spikes that guarded a research facility in Crystal Lake. Meanwhile, Kristen's colleague was asking her to halt her ambitious plan of capturing Jason, but the good doctor, in a rather skimpy outfit, wouldn't listen. It turns out that the human population that had survived on the original Earth in the year 2455 was on the brink of extinction. Kristen believed that Jason's tissue samples could pave the way for humanity's prosperity and secure its future, but more importantly, her primary objective was to save her sick husband. Kristen attacked Jason with thousands of spider-like nanites that blanketed his entire body, rendering him unconscious. In the next panel, we see that Jason had been placed inside a facility where he's kept unconscious, or at least that's what it seemed. But something happened, and Jason became conscious again. It was his mother, Pamela Voorhees, speaking to Jason in his mind. She reminds Jason that he has been imprisoned and asks him to do what is necessary. Jason learns that he can, in fact, control the machines that confine him, and he uses them to break free. The women call for security and run. It is revealed that Kristen's friend was also an android. She attacks Jason with everything she has, but Jason rips her apart. Soon the security arrives, but even they are turned to waste by Jason's sheer brute strength and rage. Kristen manages to run out to safety, and Uber Jason follows her, but instead he finds a group of young boys and girls camping near Crystal Lake. Jason knew that these kids had to be punished for the crimes no one had committed against him. He starts the massacre once again, but it seems all of them are androids, and so is the security detail that we previously encountered. It becomes evident that there are hardly any real humans left. Kristen first goes to her dying husband and fixes him using Jason's tissue samples that she had previously acquired. He miraculously gets better, but Jason is on the move and in hot pursuit, so Kristen leaves her husband and lures Jason into her spaceship. Once he was in the position she wanted him to be in, Kristen launched the ship into space, but Pamela felt that Kristen had separated her from her sweet son. Later, Kristen and her husband share a kiss when he shows signs of weakness. His mind had been contaminated and corrupted by Jason's blood and tissue samples, which Kristen had treated him with. The husband builds a machete out of nanites and stabs Kristen before taking his own life. On the other hand, Kristen's spaceship goes into space and reaches a space station named Fun Club. Jason meets the hedonistic patrons of Fun Club and resumes serving his lust for blood and violence. But hey, Uber Jason's story doesn't end there. In the next comic, titled Jason vs. Jason X, we'll explore what happened when Uber Jason met the original Jason Voorhees. When traditional evil met its upgraded counterpart. So we know that in the movie, Jason's entire body was shredded to pieces by KM-14, but much of his head survived. Jason's head was carried by the nanites to an operating table, but the head was only 13% of his body mass, and that's why the entire body could not be regenerated. So the nanites began acquiring supplementary organic matter from the corpses of the people that Jason had slain aboard the Grendel. This raw material helped Jason revive as a resurrected form of himself. himself and resembled the traditional Jason Voorhees from the initial few films. Meanwhile, space scavengers arrived on Grendel after learning from the Tiamat survivors that the Grendel housed cryogenic chambers and other high-tech equipment that could result in a massive payday. But Jason starts hunting them down one by one. Since this was the traditional Jason, he could once again hear Pamela in his head, and she reminded him of his past. Jason's rage just found reason and rationale for his horrific actions, and it was almost like he had already forgiven himself for any wrongdoing he was about to do, no matter how horrific. Each one of the scavengers perished on the Grendel until the pilot named Melda remained. She had survived because she was present on the scavenging vessel Pompeii and made an emergency evacuation. But unbeknownst to her, Jason had managed to get aboard the Pompeii. Melda requests an emergency docking to the spaceship Fun Club, which gets granted, and she docks Pompeii on Fun Club. Jason comes aboard Fun Club as well. He starts by severing the nose of one man, crushing the necks of two others, and slicing the chest of a fourth. He follows Melda, who happens to run into Uber Jason. She was the magnet that brought the traditional Jason before Uber Jason, and a death match between two evils began. I'd like to quote Heath Ledger's Joker and say that the fight was like the collision of an unstoppable force and an immovable object, but that would probably be pushing it. The traditional Jason and Uber Jason landed one blow on each other after another, while the pretty girl tried her best to stay out of the fight and not become collateral damage. Melda rushed out of there and ran into a couple of patrons. She warned them about the danger they were about to face, but the couple was more interested in finding the drunk pool, and they succeeded, just that they drowned in a pool of their own blood as both the Jasons slashed through them. Melda went to the help desk and begged them to call security, but the receptionist thought that Melda was just a high patron who didn't know what she was saying. Meanwhile, the Jasons continued their fight, and several humans lost their lives in this battle of two pure evils. Naked men and women were dying by the minute, and there was no one to help them. Melda finally manages to make the staff hear her calls of serial killer aboard the Fun Club and goes to the captain, who gets killed by the Jasons. In the end, Melda herself lands the Fun Club on Earth 2 near a lake, which looked quite similar to Crystal Lake, but the landing didn't go quite as planned, and an explosion rocked the ship. Although Melda and an android crew member managed to get to safety, Jason and Uber Jason continued their skirmish amidst the burning vessel. Machetes were drawn and punches were thrown. There was chaos, violence, and a good amount of blood splashed across the comic book panels. But in the end, Uber Jason managed to overpower his original counterpart and pulled out his brain matter. Uber Jason merged this brain matter with his own, and hence restored all the memories of the traditional Jason. He then leaves the wreckage and enters a nearby forest, probably in search of more young victims. So, the comic answers the question of who would win in a fight between Jason and Uber Jason, Jason or Jason X. I wouldn't say it was as satisfactory as one would hope, but it served its purpose. Since we're on the subject, I think you should check out our video titled Jason vs. Leatherface, Cinema's Most Ferocious Slasher Villains Collide. Who wins? And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.